Okay, well, forgot to check that, so we had kind of double music going on at the same time. But Erev Tov, everyone. It is Tuesday night. It is 8 p.m. here on the east coast of the United States, here in the diaspora. We are back. It is September, and this is the Shul Study Hall. Good to be back after taking the summer off. So we've all had a chance to have a break and do those things that we like to do in the summer, go fishing, whatever. And we are now heading into fall, and it's time. We are actually we are into actually the month of Elul, which is the month of reflection. And what better way to enter the month of Elul and then with the getting back to our studies. So I want to thank everybody for being here. Let's see what we got in the chat room. We got Yair, as always. Yair and Denise. Shoshi. I don't know if Shlomo is there or not. He may be up at camp. Richard, who actually did the lead-in music, which probably would have sounded a whole lot better had I not had it going on 2 times. I couldn't figure out why I was hearing it like that. Never heard it like that before. Anyway, and let's see. And those of you who are going to be coming in fashionably late, as usual, we're glad you're all here. We are going to be continuing our study of the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch, which we are reading. We are actually studying from the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which is the Rabbi Solomon Gansfried edition. And if you don't have the Shulchan Aruch, if you look in the description just below the video and open it up and click more, you'll find a link there to the Shulchan Aruch online. And it's essentially, I think it's actually a newer version or a new edition than the one that I'm actually reading out of. I think the one I'm reading out of is either 1962 or 1964. But essentially, you're not going to find, 1963, okay? You're not going to find that much difference between the two. There's a few minor corrections here and there, but other than that, it's essentially the same. So if you don't have the Shulchan Aruch or the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, you can go to the website and you can keep up with it there. Or you can just sit back and listen to it. So we had been, when we went on our summer hiatus, we had been studying the laws regarding Shabbat. And we had just finished the prohibited labors on Shabbat, which actually went on for quite a while. There was actually 93 paragraphs delineating those things that were forbidden to do on Shabbat. As we begin again, we are continuing on Shabbat, but we're going to start out with premises, your locations, and things that are regarded to that. So, since we are studying the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which comes from the Talmud and the Torah and originates in the Torah, then the bracha for the study of the Code of Jewish Law is the same as the bracha for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, and we are on Volume 2, Chapter 81. Okay, And if you just happen to have this, and I know oh, Tony, or Troy, excuse me, Troy, and Ben is there. I know Ben actually has the same one I do. So Ben, it is on page 104. So lucky him, he can get right to it. The rest of you probably should have bookmarked it. Okay, so let us begin. This is, again, chapter 81, the four premises with regard to Shabbat laws. There are four classes of premises which, with regard to Shabbat law: the private premise, the public premise, the premise which can be classified neither as private nor public, and we had actually discussed this quite a while ago, a bit ago, and the premise which is exempt, and we shall explain them briefly, says the author. Paragraph 2. What is to be denominated private premise? A private premise is any place which measures no less than 4 handbreadths, or 16 inches, square. As such a space is sufficiently large to be of use, and is surrounded either by partitions no less than 10 handbreadths high, even though they are not closely joined, or by a trench 10 handbreadths deep and 4 handbreadths wide. Now, you'll probably remember this when we were talking about the agricultural section, about fields and division between fields where different species were planted and so on and so forth, about fences having to be, or walls having to be so high and so wide, or a ditch pretty much the same as we have here, 10 handbreadths deep and 4 handbreadths wide. And 4 handbreadths square. Also a mound, 10 handbreadths high and 4 handbreadths square. And even a vessel, a chest for instance, if it is 10 handbreadths high, or a barrel, a russell, if it measures 4 square handbreadths in diameter. All of the above, even if they are in a public premise, or in a premise which is neither private nor public, form a separate premise by themselves and constitute a private premise. The open space over the private premise is considered private even to the very sky. So from where it ends straight up to the sky, it is considered private, a private place, a private residence. The tops of the partitions surrounding a private premise are also governed by the law of a private premise. If there are cavities in the inside of the partitions, even if they are hollow from side to side, inasmuch as they can make use of them in a private premise, they are subordinate to the partition and are considered a private premise. What is to be denominated as a public premise? Streets and marketplaces which measure 16 cubits or 24 feet square, for such was the width of the road in the Leviim camp in the wilderness, and highways by which people travel from city to city, and are 16 cubits wide, are also public premises. Anything in the public premise measuring less than 3 handbreadths in height above the ground, even if it is covered with thorns or dung, or upon which not many people step, is nevertheless subordinate to the ground and is considered as part of such a premise. A ditch in a public premise is likewise considered a part of such premise, if it is less than 3 handbreadths deep. The cavities in the walls facing the public premise, the hollow of which does not extend to the private domain, are subordinate to the public premise. So you would actually have a hollowed out area where you would set, I don't know, a pot of flowers or something like that. It doesn't extend through the wall into the private premise. So by virtue of being next to it, it actually becomes part of the the public premise. Let's see. So are subordinate to the public premise and are considered as a part of it. If they are lower than 3 handbreadths from the ground, if, however, they are higher than 3 handbreadths from the ground, then their proportions must be taken into consideration. If they measure 4 handbreadths square, but are lower than 10 handbreadths from the ground, they are considered neither as public nor as private premise. If they are higher than 10 handbreadths, they are a private premise. If they do not measure 4 handbreadths square, they are exempted places, whether they are above or below 10 handbreadths from the ground. Alleys leading into public premise are at times regarded as a public premise, and at times as neither public or private premise. There are many diverging views regarding them, and we read about this before, about the covered walkway and stuff like that. That, is it part of the public domain? Is it part of a private domain? Is it part of neither? And what can be done in those areas and what can't be done, which we studied the last time. Some authorities are of the opinion that any place through which less than 60 myriads of people pass daily, okay, as the number of Jews in the wilderness, is not a public premise, but is regarded neither public nor private premise. Therefore, nowadays, we have no public premises. However, the God-fearing should follow the more stringent view. Okay, sometimes it's more appropriate to follow the more stringent view. Paragraph 4. What premise is to be regarded as a Carmelite? Neither a public nor private. Any place which is not a public thoroughfare and is not properly surrounded by partitions, such as fields, a stream, which is no less than 10 handbreadths deep and no less than 4 handbreadths wide, and alleys which are partitioned off on 3 sides, a portico erected in front of shops where merchants linger, shelves upon which merchandise is placed, which are erected in front of columns in the public territory, and are 4 handbreadths wide, and from 3 to 10 handbreadths high. Also a place which measures 4 handbreadths square, and is surrounded by partitions which are not 10 handbreadths high, and a mound which measures 4 handbreadths square and is from 3 to 10 handbreadths high, and an excavation which measures 4 handbreadths square and is from 3 to 10 handbreadths deep. These are, besides many other premises, which are regarded as carmeliot, neither private nor public. The word carmelit is composed of rach and mol, which means neither tender nor dry, but medium. The same applying to this case, as it is neither private because it has no proper partitions, nor public premise because not many walk there. And I'm sure this probably clears up something that you have been just deeply concerned about for a long time. So now you know. Okay, paragraph 5. What is an exempted place? Any place in a public premise which does not measure 4 handbreadths square and is 3 or more handbreadths in length, or a ditch which does not measure 4 handbreadths square and is 3 or more handbreadths deep, a place which does not measure 4 handbreadths square and is surrounded by partitions on 3 or more handbreadths high. These places are considered exempt only when they are in a public premise, but they are in a carmelit when they are considered as part of such a premise. Okay, we are on to chapter 82. Just checking out the chat room, and there's a question being asked about the regulations for an eruv, which we will get to. Okay. Chapter 82. The prohibition against removing things from one premise to another. In a public premise and in a carmelit, it is forbidden to carry, throw, or hand over anything a distance of 4 cubits or 6 feet. Even carrying an object a little at a time is forbidden if the total distance adds up to 4 cubits. So you can't just move it from here to there and then wait a moment and move it a little further and wait a moment and move it a little further and wait a moment and try and circumvent the law by doing so. It has to do with the total distance that you have actually moved it, whether you interrupt or not. It is forbidden to carry, throw, or hand over anything from a private to a public premise or to a carmelit. And again, we've talked about this before in earlier chapters about talking about, basically it was talking about food on the Sabbath and how, passing food from a private place to a public place or from a public place to a private place and so on and so forth. Or to carry from a public premise or from a carmelit into a private premise. It is likewise forbidden to carry from a public premise into a carmelit or from the latter into the former. But it is permissible to carry out and bring in from a place which is exempt into a premise which is either private, public, or carmelit. and from the latter into the former, providing that the article is not carried 4 or more cubits within the premise, which is neither public, or which is a carmelit. Now, inasmuch as there are different views as to which constitutes a public premise, a premise which is a carmelit, and a private premise, therefore, in a town which is established, one who is not well versed in the law should be very careful not to carry any article from the place where it rests into an adjoining premise of a different category unless one is certain that it is permissible. So in other words, if there's any question about it, don't move it. Pretty simple, right? Paragraph 3. The lifting of an article from a place where it lies is called akira, dislodging. And putting down an article is called halacha, depositing. It is forbidden to dislodge even without depositing, and to deposit without dislodging. Of course, I don't know how you would actually do that, but obviously there is a reason they have it this way. Hence, a Jew is forbidden to hand an article to a non-Jew in order that the latter should take it from a private premise and bring it to a public premise or into a carmelit, as thereby the Jew does the dislodging, but the non-Jew himself should take the article. Okay, now it kind of makes sense, okay? Yes, you can actually do one without doing the other if you use an intermediary, okay? But this says that you actually should not do that. Okay, when a non-Jew brings an article, the Jew must not take it from his hand, as thereby he does the depositing. But the non-Jew should put the article down. When a non-Jewess takes an infant to the synagogue on the Sabbath to be circumcised, she herself should lift the infant from the crib, and when coming into the court of the synagogue, she should put the infant down, and then a Jewish should take it. Okay, so let me read that again. When a non-Jewess takes an infant to the synagogue on the Sabbath to be circumcised, she herself should lift, the non-Jewess, should lift the infant from the crib, and when coming into the court of the synagogue, she should put the infant down, and then the Jewish should take the infant up. Paragraph 4. If there is a breach in the partition of a court, then if what is left of the partition on one side of the breach measures 4 handbreadths, 16 inches wide, by 10 handbreadths high above the ground, or if the partition on the 2 sides of the breach measure each one handbreadth wide by 10 handbreadths high, it need not be repaired if the breach is not wider than 10 cubits. Okay, 10 cubits or 15 feet. Excuse me. For the breach may be considered as a door. If, however, the breach measures more than 10 cubits, or if there has been left of one side one side of the partition the width of 4 handbreadths, or of the two sides with which of 1 handbreadth of each, especially if there has been a complete breach. So think of a wall that's been knocked down in the middle. If it's been knocked down and there's some rubble and some of the stones are still at the bottom there, still in place and stuff like that. But if it's a complete breach, which means that the rubble and the stones that were part of that area have actually been taken out, that would be a complete breach. Okay, that is, nothing has been left of the partition on one side, like this, and there's a drawing of a square with well, actually not a square, but a square with one side missing. Okay. But even if the breach measures only 3 handbreadths, it is forbidden to carry anything within that court until it is repaired. And the best way to repair it is to make it in the form of a door. If there are 2 or more inhabitants in such a court, such as a common court between 2 buildings that actually belongs to both, which was fairly common, or such as we've seen in days today, where in certain apartments where the places are actually surrounded by by the buildings, and there's a central courtyard that all the people have access to, and there's usually a gate coming into it, and so on and so forth. So if there are 2 or more inhabitants in such a court, then the community of courts must be established, as well as will be explained, God willing, in chapter 94 below. Okay, we've got a ways to go. We got about 10 chapters to go before we get there. Paragraph 5. We have stated above that if the breach in the court did not measure more than 10 cubits, it may be regarded as a door, and it is not necessary to repair it. The rule applies only when there is but one breach. If, however, there are 2 or more breaches, it is essential that the area of the remaining partition be at least as large as the breach. Okay, so the rest of that partition has to be at least as large as the breach. Okay, so if the breach is 10 cubits, then the partition has to be 10 cubits or more. If the breach measures more than the parts that remain standing, or if the breaches measure more than the remaining standing, then every breach measuring more than 3 handbreadths must be repaired. Paragraph 6. What forms a door? I bet you have all been wondering this, right? What forms a door? If one erects 2 posts no less than 10 handbreadths high on either side of an opening and puts a stick or cord upon them, it forms a door. The stick or the cord must be attached to the top of the post and not to their sides. But if one drives nails into the top of the post and ties a cord to them, it is also valid. It is imperative that neither of the posts should be a greater distance from the wall than 3 handbreadths, nor should they be higher than 3 handbreadths from the ground. If an emergency where it is impossible to make the form of a door otherwise than by placing the post at a greater distance than 3 handbreadths from the wall, this requirement may be discarded. Okay, but only in the case of an emergency. Paragraph 7. Let's check the chat room here. Okay. Okay. Just some chit chatting going on in there, mostly about the weather in Canada. Okay. Paragraph 7. If a house or court opens on the street and its door opens inward, and the doorpost, lintel, and the threshold are towards the street, the space before the door is at times considered a private premise. We've talked about this before. And at times as a garmelit. Inasmuch as not everybody is well versed in these laws, therefore the laws applying to a private premise as well as those applying to a garmelit must be observed in regard to this. It is forbidden to carry anything from there into the street, which is either a public premise or a garmelit, or from the street into the place which may be regarded as a private premise. It is likewise forbidden to carry anything into such a place from the house or from the court or vice versa, for it might be regarded as a garmelit. If therefore the door of such entrance, the one opening inward, of such entrance is locked, care should be taken to have a non-Jew insert the key in the lock, and after the door is unlocked, the non-Jew should remove the key before the Jew opens the door. For if the Jew should open the door while the key is in the lock, he will thereby bring the key from the garmelit into the private premise. Paragraph 8. And people think becoming a Jew is easy, right? There's nothing to it. Okay. In many places, the roofs of some houses project from the wall into the street and is supported by pillars. It is forbidden, like a porch. It is forbidden to carry anything from such a house into the space beneath the projection or from there into the house. It is also forbidden to carry anything there a distance of 4 cubits, as it is subject to the law relating to the street, which is either a public premise or a garmelit, and although the roof rests upon the pillars giving it the form of a door, which the law regards as a partition, yet since there are no partitions on its sides, nothing may be carried there. It is therefore necessary to erect on each side of the post near the wall, opposite the post which supports the roof, thus forming other doors. If many similar houses adjoin one another, it suffices to form such a door at each side of the outermost house. The inhabitants should symbolically establish an intercommunity of courts. In other words, in their roof, right? Okay. One may give food, and again, we're kind of reiterating what we've already learned. before. One may give food to a non-Jew in a court or in a house, although he knows that he will carry it outside, so long as he does not put the food into his hand and thus commits the act of dislodging. This may be done only when the non-Jew is allowed to eat the food in the house. Is allowed to eat the food in the house should he desire to do so. But if he is not allowed to eat it there, or if a great quantity of food is given him so that he could not eat it all there, or if he is given other articles which it is obvious that he will carry out, it is forbidden, for it appears as though it was given him for the express purpose of carrying out. Okay, and remember, all these laws have to do with Shabbat. Okay, during the regular weekday, you can give anybody anything, right? You can carry from one place to another, and so on and so forth. Paragraph 10. A woman may lead her child even in a public premise. She must not, however, drag it, but the child should lift up one foot and keep the other foot on the ground, supporting himself thereon while lifting the other foot. If, however, the woman drags both feet of the child, it is just as if she carries it, and it is forbidden even in a Carmelite. Carrying a child is forbidden even if it is big enough to walk by itself, and even in a Carmelite. The principle that a living being carries itself applies to the law, which relieves the one carrying it from bringing a sin offering, but it is still a violation of a rabbinical ordinance. In the case of a Carmelite, it is a violation of a rabbinical ordinance based on other rabbinical ordinances, and it is necessary to warn the public who err in this regard. Of course, during the week, you can drag your kid anywhere you want, right? Paragraph 11. It is forbidden to draw water from a stream that runs through a courtyard. Paragraph 12. While one is standing in a private premise, one is forbidden to throw water or spit into a public premise or into a Carmelite, or from a public premise or a Carmelite into a private premise, or from a public premise into a Carmelite, or from a Carmelite into a public premise. One is likewise forbidden to walk 4 cubits in a public premise or in a Carmelite, or from one premise into another, having saliva in one's mouth, if the saliva has already been moved from one corner of the mouth to another. 13. It is permissible to spill slops in the courtyard, which measures 4 cubits square, although it will run off to a public premise. Well, thank goodness for that, right? At least you can throw your garbage out. Okay. We're on chapter 83. We're almost at our halfway point. So let's take a pause here. And when we return, we will begin with chapter 83, which deals with the enclosures of spaces. So let me cue up our favorite break music. I'm sure you all know what's coming. And we will return in 6 minutes. And stay tuned.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
It's intermission time, folks, so hurry, hurry, hurry. Step right over to our refreshment center for the most extravagant array of refreshment goodies ever assembled under one roof. Enjoy breathtaking, mouth-watering goodies, everything from a snack to a delicious full meal. At our refreshment center, you'll find a large variety of goodies to satisfy your hunger, your thirst, or your sweet tooth. So hurry, hurry, hurry. Visit our refreshment center now. The show starts in 5 minutes. The show starts in 4 minutes. The show starts in 3 minutes. The show starts in 2 minutes. show starts in 1 minute. And now, on with the show.
And we are back. I want to thank everybody for sticking around through the break. I got to tell you, it's so nice to be back doing the study sessions. I really miss it during the summertime. Especially this year, there wasn't a whole lot going on. I mean, it was a very, very unusual summer, very hot, very little rain, which means that we didn't get a lot done outside. The allergies were very bad this year, so which kind of kept me inside most of the time. So I'm glad that the weather is finally starting to moderate a little bit, even though we're going to be in the 90s the next couple of days, but back down into the lower 80s after that, and we can actually get out and get some stuff done, and we can get back to studying. I miss it. As I'm sure that most of you who are regulars of this, that we've been doing it for so many years now, that you kind of miss it during the summertime. But it gives us a chance to get other things, to do other things. So we left off. We were just getting ready to go into chapter 83, which deals with enclosures and spaces. Paragraph 1. The enclosure by partitions, which renders the carrying of anything within permissible, applies only when it has been fenced around for dwelling purposes. By dwelling purposes is meant when one builds a house to dwell in, or when one opens a door from his house and fences it around by partitions after a manner of courts which are built around houses, then no matter how large the enclosure is, it is absolutely private premise. Enclosures, however, that have been fenced around for other than dwelling purposes, such as gardens and orchards, where the fences are made only for the purpose of guarding its contents, are judged by their size. It is, if it is an area that would not require more than 2 seahs, a certain measure, of seed, it is permitted to carry things in it. But if it would require more than 2 seahs of seed, it is regarded as a carmelet. Paragraph 2. What is the size of an area requiring 2 seahs of seed? I know you are asking yourself that question. It's probably been weighing heavily on your mind. Exactly, what is the size that requires 2 seahs of seed? Well, here's the answer. It is the area of the court of the tabernacle, 100 cubits, or 150 feet long, by 50 cubits, or 75 feet wide. If it is a quadrangle, ooh, there's a math word. We found a math word. Cool. It should measure 70 cubits, 105 feet, and 4 handbreadths, 16 inches square. If the area is circular or in any other shape, it must measure 5,000 square cubits, or 7,500 feet. That's a pretty big area, actually. If, however, the length of the enclosure is more than twice its breadth, even if only by 1 cubit, then it is forbidden to carry anything therein, for it is then considered as an area requiring more than 2 seahs of seed, since it does not resemble the court of the tabernacle. Paragraph 3. An enclosure, which is, so next time you're looking for a house and you have a nice house with a fenced-in yard in the back and everything, just remember that. Just remember how big that has to be. Okay, an enclosure which has been fenced around for other than dwelling purposes, and which would not require more than 2 seahs of seed, where carrying is permissible. If there is a court adjacent to it, it is permissible to carry utensils from the enclosure into the court and from the court into the enclosure, as the enclosure and the court are considered one premise. The enclosure, however, is not considered the same premise as the house. Hence, it is forbidden to carry vessels from the enclosure into the house and from the house into the enclosure. Paragraph 4. If an enclosure has been first fenced around for other than dwelling purposes, and the dwelling was built thereafter, or if a door was made in the house leading to it, how can it be legally converted into an enclosure for dwelling purposes? By making a breach in the partitions measuring more than 10 cubits. An opening of 10 cubits is regarded as a door. But if it is more than that, it is a breach, thereby nullifying the partitions as a fence after the partition should have been repaired, and it will be considered as having been fenced around for dwelling purposes. Paragraph 5. If one has planted trees in a court which has an area requiring more than 2 seahs of seed, even if they occupy the greater part of the court, the fence is still considered as made for dwelling purposes, because people usually seek the shade of trees. If, however, one planted vegetables in the court and they occupy the greater part of the court, even if it is not one area but they are scattered, it then ceases to be a dwelling, and the whole court is considered as a garden. If, however, the planted area occupies less than half of the court, and the area requires less than 2 seahs of seed, it is subordinate to the court, and the whole of it is regarded as a court. But if the sown area occupies more than 2 seahs of seed in one place, then the place which was sown is regarded as a carmelit, and the remainder of the court is open completely to the place which is forbidden to carry into it or from it. It is therefore forbidden to carry anything therein 4 cubits. Paragraph 6. A court which has an area requiring 2 seahs of seed, or less, and part of it has been planted, should also be judged by the greater part of it. If the greater part of the court has been planted, although carrying is permissible therein, inasmuch as the area does not require more than 2 seahs of seed, it is nevertheless forbidden to carry into it utensils which were in the house on the Sabbath. It is therefore necessary to make a partition in front of the garden in order to be permitted to carry things from the house into the court. Chapter 84, carrying garments or ornaments on the Sabbath. Paragraph 1. One must not walk out in a public premise or in a Carmelit with any article that is neither a garment nor an ornament. Hence, one is forbidden to walk out with a needle or a pin stuck in one's garment, even when it is needed for his clothes. However, a woman, inasmuch as it is the custom of women to fasten their bands with pins, such as veils and the like, it is permitted to walk out with a pin required for her apparel, but not with a needle. Paragraph 2. There are also certain ornaments which our rabbis of blessed memory forbid to carry in a public premise. Such ornaments forbidden to men, and some forbidden to women, such as they might remove in order to show them to somebody. Now the custom prevails to permit it, and the authorities have given reasons for it. But the God-fearing should be strict about it. Especially should a man be careful not to walk out with a ring on which there is no engraved seal. One should especially refrain from carrying his watch with him, even if it is attached to a gold chain that he wears on his neck, which is an ornament. The pocket watch certainly is considered a burden and must not be carried on the Sabbath, which kind of tells you a little bit about something about when these laws were written, because at that time, that was common. Pocket watches were common. Wristwatches, different story. It is customary to allow to carry on the Sabbath a silver key, although it is made for use, since it is also made for an ornament. And I've always surmised that the whole idea of the Phi Beta Kappa key actually comes from the law here, because it is actually an ornament. Okay, so paragraph 4. Oh, wait a minute. Paragraph 3. Eyeglasses may not be carried out, although they are framed in a silver frame. Okay. Now they're talking about carrying them out. A woman is not allowed to put a cloth on her veil, nor a man a cloth on his hat to protect the apparel from the rain, because this is not the way the garment is worn, and it is a burden. But if their intention is merely not to be annoyed by the rain, it is permissible. A person, and seen this before. The Haredim that will wear their strimal or their spodik on Shabbat and have the plastic around them when it is raining or snowing or something like that, because you know that eventually the hat is going to become it's going to become saturated with rain, and then it's going to start dripping in the face and everything. So in that case, it's permissible, because it's not to be annoyed by the water dripping down off of it into their face. Paragraph 5. A person who is lame or convalescent or very old, and it is impossible for him to walk about without a cane, it is permitted to walk with a cane in his hand. However, if he can walk without a cane in his home, and he uses a cane only when he walks in the street, he is forbidden to do so. A blind person must not walk out with a cane in a community in which there is no eruv. Okay? Now, Shlomo, or Benjamin, chapter 94 is where we're going to get into the eruv. Okay, so we got a little ways to go. We got about 10 chapters to go. But hang tight, we're going to get there. Okay. One who has no need at all for a cane is not permitted to walk out with it on the Sabbath, even in a community which is provided with an eruv, because it may look like showing contempt for the Sabbath. Paragraph 6. One who is fettered with chains may walk out with them on the Sabbath. Okay, we don't see a lot of that these days, but now you know. Okay. It is for paragraph 7. It is forbidden to walk out on stilts, long poles in which there is a place for the feet, and any means of which people walk in mud or in water or through other various nasty things, which is kind of where the whole thing about walking with stilts came from. Back in the Middle Ages, they actually, people like wore shoes similar to what the Japanese wear. I believe they called sabo, which actually raised them up quite a bit off of the ground, so that they could walk through. Basically, this came from London, where they could walk through the streets of London without having to walk through the various nasty things that people were pouring out into the public walkways. Okay, but no stilts on Shabbat. Paragraph 8. One may walk out with a plaster upon one's wound, providing it is not placed on the wound on the Sabbath, as is provided for in chapter 91, verse 10, or the paragraph 10 below. For since it is a remedy, it has the same status as an ornament. One may also wrap it around with a piece of cloth that is not costly, which is merely an adjunct to the plaster. So in other words, kind of keep it clean, keep the Band-Aid clean or whatever. But to wrap around it an article of value like a handkerchief or the like is forbidden, because it is neither subordinate to the plaster nor is it a garment. It is a mere burden. Paragraph 9. One may walk out with the cotton placed in one's ear to absorb the pus. Ooh, lovely. Providing it is tightly stuck so that it cannot fall out. One may likewise walk out with cotton or straw in one's shoe, if it is put there in such a manner that it cannot fall out. Okay, so if you want to walk around with straw in your shoes, you can do that. I don't know a lot of people doing that these days, but obviously you're allowed to do that. I don't know why, but okay. Paragraph 7, or paragraph 10. A woman is not permitted to walk out with the cotton which she attaches for the period of menstruation in order not to soil her clothes. Neither may she walk out with the truss which she puts on for the same purpose, unless it is in the form of a true garment. However, if she puts on the cotton or the belt to save herself from discomfort, that is, if the blood will drip on her body and dry up and she will be annoyed, she is permitted to walk out with them. So again, all depends on the intent. You know, we go into this quite a bit and talk about this at great length. The intent has to be there. Okay? So we have the law, and then we have the intent that we have to fulfill the law, and hence why we have these laws written this way, so they'd say, okay, well, I can't do this, but my intent is not for this. My intent is to do it for this reason. Okay. So, same as when we talked about the blessings for food. We talked about all the different blessings for food and how, okay, you could say one blessing over the food, but you had to have in your head at the time that you said the blessing to cover all the rest of the food that you were going to consume with the one that you were doing the bracha over. Paragraph 11. When walking in a place of mud and clay, one may raise one's clothes slightly so as not to soil them, but one must not raise them too high. Okay, it doesn't say anything about how high. It just says that high enough, but not too high. Paragraph 12. A person may walk out with two garments on the Sabbath, wearing one above the other, even if he does not need the other garment for himself, but for a neighbor who is in need of it. This is only true when he wears two such garments occasionally on weekdays. Then it is his usual way of dressing, even if most of the time he does not dress himself thus. If, however, he never wears two such garments, he is forbidden to walk out with them on the Sabbath, because the second one is considered a mere burden. The same law applies to two pairs of felt shoes, and with one large hat over a small one. Okay, so any of these things, you can wear two if it is your custom to do so during the week, even if it's only occasionally to do it during the week, then it is permitted to do it on the Sabbath. Paragraph 13. With regard to walking out with two belts, one above the other, It is the custom to place, is the custom of the place to wear two, one cheap one underneath and over it an expensive one. We may do so on the Sabbath, although we are in need of only one, and we put the second one because we need it for someone else. If, however, it is not customary to put on two belts, although we choose to dress in this manner, since one girdle suffices, the second one is considered a burden. In any event, it is permissible to walk out with two belts when there is a garment intervening between the two. As for instance, when the one underneath is on the drawers and the one above is on the trousers, for them we have the benefit and use of both. Paragraph 14. It is the practice to wrap a handkerchief, under the upper garment around the trousers. But we must be careful not to make two knots in it, one above the other. The God-fearing should remove the suspenders so that the handkerchief is used for the purpose of holding up the pants. Some people are accustomed to wrap the handkerchief around their necks. This is not permissible unless they wear no other kerchief, and they are accustomed to wearing a kerchief at times in cold weather. However, it is definitely forbidden if they merely throw it around their neck and allow its corners to hang loosely. It is likewise forbidden to wrap it around one's leg or one's hand and walk out in the street with it. Paragraph 15. Some authorities permit to wear gloves on the Sabbath, while others forbid it. A muff, however, is preferable to gloves. So there you go. Okay. It is permissible to walk out with a talit if it is worn in the usual manner, but it is forbidden to fold it and wrap it around the neck, for it is not customary to wear it that way. Paragraph 17. If a garment has two straps or two strings with which it is tied, or if it has hooks with which it is fastened, and one of these was torn off, although the remaining one is of no value, nevertheless, if the owner of the garment intends to repair it later by replacing its mate, and the remaining one does not become subordinate to the garment, it is therefore like a burden, and it is forbidden to walk out with such a garment on the Sabbath. But if the owner does not intend to repair it, the remaining one is of no value. Thus it becomes subordinate to the garment, and it is permissible to walk out with it. If it is an article of value, such as a silk loop or a silver hook, even if its owner does not intend to repair it, it is not subordinate to the garment, and it is forbidden to walk out with it. Paragraph 18. I know there's a few of you that are probably interested in this one. I'm not going to say who. I'm just going to leave it at that. Okay. Paragraph 18. Bald-headed persons who put on their heads a toupee of combed flax or wool to look like hair may walk out with it on the Sabbath in the public premise because it is considered as an ornament, providing it has been prepared before the Sabbath. Paragraph 19. One who wears an amulet must consult a scholar as to whether or not he may walk out with it on the Sabbath, because not all amulets are of equal value. A woman who wears a stone, commonly known as a Sternschuss, eagle stone, Sternschuss, eagle stone, as a protection against abortion, is permitted to walk out with it on the Sabbath. Okay, now we're going to get into some really interesting stuff. Okay, it's actually it's interesting if you've studied some of the Hasidic masters, like Rabbi Nachman and Breslov and a few others who actually had fires break out in their villages on the Sabbath. And this chapter deals with chapter 85, if a fire breaks out on the Sabbath. Paragraph 1, if, God forbid, a fire breaks out on the Sabbath, our rabbis of blessed memory were fearful that if the owner of the house and the members of the family were to engage in saving what they can, they might forget that it is the Sabbath and extinguish the fire due to their being excited and frightened at the prospect of losing their property. They therefore decreed that the owner is forbidden to save even those articles which may be handled and carried out into a place where it is permissible to remove them. Only that which is required for the needs of the day may be saved. If the fire breaks out on Friday evening before the meal, we may save food for 3 meals and also food for animals. If it occurs on Shabbat morning, we may save food for 2 meals. If it occurs in the afternoon, we may save food for 1 meal. If one vessel contains much food, like many loaves of bread or a barrel full of wine, since it can be taken out at one time, it is permissible to do so. If we spread out a sheet and put therein large quantities of food and drink, it is likewise permissible to take it out. We are also allowed to take out all the vessels we need for that day. Paragraph 2. One may say to others, come and save anything you can for yourselves, and everyone may save the food that he needs or one vessel that contains even much food. Whatever they save belongs to them, since the owner renounced his ownership, and thus they take possession of abandoned property. Nevertheless, if they are God-fearing people, they should restore to the owner whatever they saved, since they are aware that he has not abandoned it with his goodwill, and they are allowed to receive compensation for saving it. This will not be considered as money earned on the Sabbath, because according to the law, the property saved belongs to them. However, it is a virtuous trait not to accept any compensation for the trouble of saving anything on the Sabbath, although it is not considered as money earned on the Sabbath, because pious men should avoid doing anything which people consider wrong. Paragraph 3. All of the aforegoing applies only when taken to a place to which it is permissible to carry things out on the Sabbath. But to a place where it is forbidden to carry anything out, nothing may be saved. However, we are permitted to put on as many garments as we can, or wrap ourselves with them, and carry them out even into a public premise. We may then take them off and put them on others and bring them out, and this may be repeated the whole day. We may even say to others, "Come and save," and they too may act in the same manner. Paragraph 4. The houses in which there is no fire, but are close to the fire, and the owners fear that the fire may spread to them, they are allowed to save anything and bring it into a place which it may be carried, since they are not so excited. Most authorities hold that money and other valuables, although they may not be handled on the Sabbath, may be saved from a great sudden loss, such as fire, a flood, or robbery, by placing them on some edibles and carry them out together. But in any other case, it is forbidden to save anything untouchable by this method. Other authorities are even still more lenient about this, and they hold that the valuables may be carried out by themselves, because in the case of a great loss which comes suddenly, the law forbidding the handling of certain objects on the Sabbath is lifted, providing they are not moved to a place which they may not be carried. Paragraph 5. All sacred books, whether written or printed, may be saved from a fire or from a flood on the Sabbath, and they may be carried even into a court or into a lane, whereto it is forbidden to carry other objects, because it is not provided with an eruv, or intercommunity of courts, providing this court and lane are in a condition where an eruv or a partnership would make them legal for things to be carried into them. It is permitted to save such books by a non-Jew, even when they are needed to be carried into a public premise. Paragraph 6. The case of a book may be saved together with the book, and the bag of the tefillin together with the tefillin. Paragraph 7. The scroll of the Torah should be saved in preference of other sacred books. Paragraph 8, and that's where we will stop for this evening. If there is apprehension that there might be a possible loss of life, the fire may be extinguished. Therefore, in places where Jews live among non-Jews, it is permissible to extinguish the fire even when it is in the house of a non-Jew. It all depends upon the circumstances of the case. It is only permissible to extinguish the fire, but it is forbidden to desecrate the Sabbath in order to save some property. If a person violates the law and does desecrate the Sabbath, he should consult a rabbi who shall point out to him the way to repentance. And we will stop there, because that's the end of the chapter. And we will pick up again next week on chapter 86, which deals with bathing on the Sabbath. So, again, I want to thank everybody for being here this evening. Glad to be back. Glad to be studying. Tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time will be the Torah study with Rabbi and Zeta, my sidekick. And we will be studying the Torah portion of the week. So, the Shoftim. So, I hope you will return and be with us tomorrow. And don't forget also on Shabbat, 8 p.m. and Shabbat morning at 10 a.m. for Shabbat services. Until then, we'll say Erev Tov, and hopefully we will see you tomorrow. And Laila Tov, everyone.